What is going on, everybody? It is Sean here, back with another One Piece TCG video. And today we are talking about the current meta for One Piece with the release of the Three Brothers starter deck that came out last week. To a lot of hype. I did an opening on my channel. If you guys haven't watched it, go check it out. Had some pretty good polls. But yeah, we're just going to kind of cover the meta right now before OP07 comes out and just kind of talk about where everything's at, and maybe even talk about like a little bit of where I think things could be, because the meta has changed quite a bit. I mean, One Piece just in general, the game has shifted a lot, and a lot of things are like, a lot of the shift has been good, and then a lot of the shift has been not so good. So we're going to kind of talk about that. But if you guys are new here, please like and subscribe. Of course, got more content on the way as always, especially for new players. But without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's go ahead and Katakuri. So let's talk about Katakuri. Now, Katakuri is one of the few leaders that has stayed good since OP03. It's consistent. It has luck on its side. It has a very generic effect. You know, you can look at yours or your opponent's life and move it around, and you get plus 1,000, so making it a 7K swing. So you get essentially a free 7K swing, which is really good. So that being on its side and just the Big Mom package being really strong, you know, the only downside to Katakuri is it has a lot of bricks. I think that, you know, in this current meta, Katakuri just has a lot of bricks, and essentially the way to beat Katakuri is just going wide and just swinging big. You just got to swing for face every single turn, because basically if you can out tempo them and just do as much aggression as you can and just get them to the point where they can't counter out of anything, you win the game. And there are a couple of decks that are really good at doing that we're going to talk about. But I still think that Katakuri is still probably in the top tier. The only downside is, again, it just has a lot of bricks, but I think it's still pretty strong. And I know there's a lot of yellow hate out there, and I get it. It's annoying, but yeah. I mean, I used to run it back in OP03 and OP04, and it's still a really solid deck, but I think I just kind of moved on and wanted to try other things. So still a really strong deck, but with that aside. And then let's talk about Gecko Moria, which is one of the new leaders from OP06. And this is my personal favorite deck right now. I think Gecko Moria is a ton of fun. I love the Thriller Bark package. I just love what this deck can do, you know. And this is one of the decks that I was talking about that has a really good matchup into Katakuri. I mean, just being able to play Perona early and starve your opponent out and just be able to establish a board. I think Moria is better about establishing a board than Sakazuki, because Sakazuki has better removal than Gecko Moria, but Gecko Moria is a lot simpler to play. I think that's why a lot of people, myself included, have kind of started to kind of progress towards Moria, with the obvious Sakazuki getting banned in June. But, you know, Navy Moria especially is really strong. I've seen a couple of the Thriller Bark packages for Moria, and they can do some cool stuff, but it's just not as consistent. So I think Moria is without a doubt one of the top decks in the game right now. It's super fun. It's super consistent. We've seen it quite a bit. We've seen it top quite a bit. It's definitely getting its place in the meta. So I think that Gecko Moria is up there for sure. And again, it's my personal favorite deck. Let's talk about good old Sakazuki, the deck that pretty much everyone likes to hate on. Well, that and Katakuri, but good old Sakazuki. Now, if we're being honest, and I don't play Sakazuki, it's not really my play style, and it's never vibed with me. But if we're being honest, Sakazuki is objectively probably the most consistent deck in the game. As much as I hate admitting that, it has great removal. You can essentially get rid of almost anything in the game. It has good card draw, and again, that's part of the reason why it's getting banned. It's just, and I mean, in Worlds, like it was all Sakazuki players. So it's just super consistent. The Navy package is really strong. It just has a lot going for it. And I mean, black and blue is just a really good color combo, being having the best blockers in the game and just being able to essentially bottom deck anything. It's just, it has just an answer to almost everything. I mean, really, the only thing that Sakazuki does really bad against is aggression, which I mean, that's a lot of decks. So yeah, but it's, if we're being honest, it is technically the most consistent deck in the game, which again, I hate saying that, but it's just the truth, man. It's the truth. So yeah, it's technically probably the best deck in the game right now because it just has an answer for everything. It really does. So we're gonna put it up there. These are essentially the big three right now. Is Sakazuki, Moria, and Katakuri. Those are what we've been seeing a lot, just in tournaments and just overall. And it makes sense. But that's pretty much the meta defining right here. I don't think there's anything else that I'll probably put up here. I think it's just going to be these three, but we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about that. But maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is the big three that we're looking at for here. And I think this will change in OP07. I think when we talk about Enel, we'll talk about a little bit more about it. But yeah. Now let's talk about Zoro. So Zoro has changed a lot. Red has changed a lot. We all know set 1 and 2, Red was just absolutely just busted. It was just insane. And now things have kind of shifted a little bit. Zoro having a lot of kind of weenie characters are able to get rid of, again, with like Sakazuki and Katakuri. So Zoro, we've been seeing a little bit here and there. It's definitely not the giant it once was, but I think it still can do really well. It has a good matchup into Sakazuki. And, red being red, being able to just spam the board and be able to just consistently push out bodies. So I think for Zoro in this current meta, since he's not the best, I think I'm going to put him in the C tier. Like you still see it. I still see it at locals pretty frequently. And it still is a really fun deck. And I mean, you can still have fun with it, but just in this current meta, I don't think that it really stands in any of these areas. So I think just for now, it's just kind of a local deck. And then let's talk about Reiju. So Reiju is a deck that I think a lot of people were excited for, probably not as much excited for compared to Moria or even Perona. Perona was getting a lot of hype, but this deck has honestly kind of surprised me a little bit. It's actually pretty good. I think you've seen it a little bit. It's in the meta, and I think it's topped a couple events, and it has an answer to a lot of different situations. Being able to, with pudding, being able to make your opponent just discard and redraw their whole hand. That's really annoying. And I mean, basically, the main issue with this deck is I think the stage is really crucial. When I was playing in a PPG event, a lot of players or a couple of players didn't see their stage, and they just it just was not, it just didn't go well. So I think it's very reliant on certain resources. And if you don't see those resources right away and you don't have a way to get them, then yeah, it just kind of falls apart. But I've just seen it do really well. And I think overall it has the potential to be a really solid deck. So I think for now it's probably in B tier. I was debating on maybe putting it in top decks, but I just haven't seen it do as well to be there, but still really solid. Then let's talk about Yamato. So Yamato is another leader that was getting a lot of hype. I mean, yellow and green is a pretty nasty combo. You have the control aspect of green and just the trigger aspect and life gain in yellow. And you have like the 9-cost Yamatos. You have Horty Jones, the super rare, which is really annoying and essentially can win the game for you. So, but the other thing is like I've seen this deck do really bad. It does really bad against removal. When I played a couple, it honestly went it was pretty smooth sailing. I think I was either playing Moria or I was playing Uta, but yeah. And I mean, the fact that it's double attack, it's really good early game, but I feel like later on it doesn't really matter as much because, obviously double attack doesn't really matter anymore once you get to 1 life. So, I still think that it is really good, and we've been seeing it a decent amount. So, I'm gonna put it in top decks because I think it does a little bit better than Reiju, and obviously it does better than Zoro, so it's still up there and you still see it pretty frequently, and it still wins. It still tops. I mean, if you see all you need to do and you just push out that aggression straightforward, like I think that yeah, it's a solid deck. It's just I don't think it's as good. It's definitely not on this level. And I think that it was a maybe a little bit overhyped, but I think it's still a solid deck. All right, guys, let's talk about Whitebeard. So Whitebeard was really busted back in set 2 for people who are kind of new to One Piece. So yeah, Whitebeard was kind of a problem a while back. And it's definitely not as big of a problem now, but it's still really strong. And I've seen Whitebeard get played a lot more recently, which is interesting because we didn't really see it a whole lot in OP05. People just weren't really playing it, but now people are starting to play it a lot more. And I think because it has a pretty good matchup into Moria, and it has a good matchup into a couple other decks. But yeah, and I've seen it at locals quite a bit, and I've just seen a lot of deck lists and people playing with it. So from what I've seen it do, and it did win in Italy. That's another thing. It won in Italy, so it's been doing really well. I think with some of the new support. So I'm gonna put it in A tier because it never really got bad. I mean, it got banned for a month, and then Bandai kind of obviously pushed back from what everybody was complaining about and just put everything back to normal. So it's still really good. It's definitely not as strong as it once was, but the fact that with all the new support, people are kind of bringing it back and trying out new deck lists, and again, it has a good matchup into a couple of these decks. So that's why it's kind of sticks around. And just, like late game, taking your own life and just being able to play the 9 drop and just having just a massive hand, like it just gets you so much security later in the game. So yeah, I think Whitebeard is still super strong. All right, now Enel. So Enel is interesting because in OP05, I absolutely hated playing against this deck. It made games so grindy and so annoying. So was not a fan of playing against the deck. Now the deck itself was yeah really strong, and I think Katakuri is the better deck right now. I think in OP07 with EB01 coming out in OP07, I think this deck's going to get a lot stronger and it's potentially could surpass it again. But yeah, in OP05, it was really strong, but I still think Katakuri was just the stronger leader, just that 7K, and just really just kind of stalling out until Big Mom. I just think the Big Mom package is just really strong, and you're just stalling out till it comes out. But Enel is still really strong. Now, it's not as strong as it is right now because, like I said, I think Katakuri with the support, like Kiku and some of the other cards that we got with this set, just really work towards Katakuri more than Enel. But it's still really strong. It has a really good matchup into a couple of these decks, but it also has a really bad matchup into a couple of the other decks. So, but with Enel, you're basically just kind of stalling out the game. It's not. It's really just if your opponent has a way better board than you and you don't have anything, you're just trying to delay the game. You're basically just kind of just beating a dead horse. So I think it still is a strong deck, and I still see it quite a bit. So I think I'm gonna put it in the B tier for now. Still really solid. Um, Again, I think in OP07, it's gonna be one in the top decks for sure, with just the newer cards coming out, and just the support it's gonna get. But for now, I don't. I think Katakuri is still the stronger leader. All right, Perona. So Perona was a leader that a lot of people were excited for. A lot of people were excited for this leader because Green and Black, tried with Isho, it didn't really work, but her ability is it's pretty good. I mean, being able to rest a 4 cost or lesser gives something -1. With Green having the control aspect of resting and restanding stuff, and then Black having the cost reduction, it's a pretty good combo. And like I said, back in OP04, I believe, Isho didn't really work too great, but I think Perona definitely is a better step, like a good better step in the right direction. Now, that being said, I don't think it's nowhere near as strong as Moria because you run a lot of the same cards from the Thriller Bark package and even the Navy stuff, but you just don't have as much answer to it, and it's just a lot slower. And I feel like in a lot of situations, I just couldn't. I just my hand was just full of bricks, and there was just nothing I could do. Especially early on, I feel like early on, brand new. If you run brand new, it tends to whiff a lot, and there's just not a lot you can do besides getting to your 4 Dawn turn and playing Ryuma and being able to KO something, which is good, but it just early I feel like early game Perona really struggles. Because again, unlike Moria, Moria can get something out like super fast with its ability and put stuff in the trash. So yeah, Perona is definitely not. I don't think it's as good as people were anticipating it to be. I still think that it is a fun deck and it can be really good. And I've seen it at locals quite a bit. And it was the deck that I was originally going to play, but I just switched to Moria just because it was just way more consistent. So I think I'm going to throw it in probably the end of B. I think, it can be competitive. I think that it has the potential to and top, maybe even top a couple events, but overall it's definitely not as strong as a lot of people were anticipating it to be. All right, let's talk about Uta because I have a lot to say about this deck because, Uta is actually probably one of my favorite decks. I know I said Moria is my favorite deck, and it is, but Uta is a lot of fun, man. I think Uta is a really solid deck. I think I really like the film package. Film Kid back in the day it topped in a lot of events, and it was just really fun. And just with Uta, just being able to just get a ton of cards in hand and just the support that you have and like the top end with like the 8 cost Kid, the 9 cost Zoro, and the Dofis, whichever one you want to use. I just think that, late game, it's really good because you're able to get out of a lot of situations. You're able to spam the board quickly with the famous, Brook, or sorry, Luffy into Brook into Nami. And with the Mihawk that came out in the Zoro and Sanji starter deck, it just gave us more 2Ks. And it's also just another way to spam the board. So I think Uta is a sleeper. I think this deck is slept on. Um, and I've seen really good success with it. And you've seen it every now and then. Again, it doesn't really top anything, but I think it's really solid. I think it's a really solid deck. It's a lot of fun. I just have a soft spot for green. I think green's a super fun color, but I still think that it's at least in the B. I'm gonna put it right here. I think it just has a lot of answers to stuff. It has good matchup into yellow, and it has an okay matchup into Sakazuki. It can kind of go either way, but I think Uta is slept on. I think it's a really, really solid deck. And let's talk about Red Green Law for a second, because I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, but this deck, again, with this Whitebeard and Zoro, essentially were the top three a while back, but a lot has changed. Yellow has gotten stronger. Black has gotten stronger. Blue and black has gotten a lot stronger. So it tends to struggle against a couple of newer decks. And again, Law is a deck that you definitely need to know what you're doing. You can't just, hop in. Like, it's a deck that requires a lot of skill and practice. So, and even back then, it still did. So, but I think with a lot of the current matchups, like with, decks like Enel and Reiju just being able to get out of certain situations or delay the game, it's just not as good right now as it once was. So I think I'm gonna throw it in the C tier. It shows up here and there. It's not like completely dead or anything, but it's definitely not quite as strong as it once was. And it doesn't have an answer to everything like it once did with a lot of the newer editions. But I still see people playing it, and I still think it's a fun deck. And let's talk about the other law, which is red purple law. So red purple law, I think has actually gotten better. I've always thought this deck was good. I thought it was interesting. When it first came out, it wasn't as strong as I think I was wanting it to be. But I think with a lot of the newer support, especially in OP06, because they got the Gordons essentially reprinted to the card. I can't remember what the card's called, but we got that card reprinted. It's not the Gordons, but it does the same thing. But yeah, that and the super rare four cost Reijus. So just basically more four cost characters and just more removal, more ways to reduce something to 3,000 and being able to bottom deck it. So, and with EB01 and OP07, I think this deck is just going to be fantastic, which I am all for because I've always liked playing it. I've always thought that it was a fun deck and it was really unique. So, it struggled into Enel like for the longest time. Just the yellow matchup for this deck was just awful. So, I think that's what kind of held it back. But with EB01 coming out and the Bond Clay card and just a couple of other cards that are really going to boost this deck quite a bit. So, I think for now, it is really solid. I think it's been kind of showing a little bit here and there, and you've been seeing it being played a little bit more competitively. So I think I'm gonna put it in B tier. It's slowly getting there. It's slowly kind of starting to get to the top a little more, which I'm all for. And let's talk about Nami. So Nami is funny because I think when it first came out, it wasn't as a lot of there was a lot of hype for it. A lot of people were super excited about a mill deck, a blue and mono blue mill deck, which it is fun. It's really unique, but just in this current meta, it's just not that good. There's just a lot of matchups where it can just get blown out of the water. Yeah, especially against aggression. It has a lot of great defense, but I don't know, just with the way the meta is going to shift, I don't think it's really going to be heavily played. So I think that overall, it's a locals deck. I think, people play it for fun. They don't play it to top events. They don't play it to top locals even. They just play it for fun. And I totally respect that because it is a fun deck. It's super unique. And I think in some ways it even could be meta, but just not in this current meta. So, and let's go ahead and talk about the newest additions, which are the three brothers. And we're going to talk about first the black yellow Luffy leader. Now, this is pretty much, in my opinion, the strongest leader. I think most people will agree. Maybe some will disagree. And if you disagree with me, go ahead and drop in the comments. I would love to hear it. I'm not going to get salty. I'm not going to argue with you. I will totally listen. But Black Yellow Luffy is super strong, especially having yellow and the cost reduction and having the best blockers, having access to the Borsos and just so many other resources. Now, the thing with this deck, though, is it's a combo deck. So the sequencing can throw you off a bit, especially one thing to keep in mind with this deck is face up life cards go to the bottom of your deck. So certain cards if you play it wrong at the wrong time, you're basically just wasting it. So that's kind of something new to the game that we're not super familiar with. So it's something to keep in mind. But I mean, being able to get your leader to 9k and just swing out, and also that 2 life gain is really good. So, it's a fun deck, man. It's a lot of fun. So, I think it's definitely in OP06, it's still really good, but in OP07, it's going to get even better. So, I'm going to throw it in A tier for now. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's just kind of my prediction. All right, so let's talk about Sabo. So again, Sabo is not as strong as Luffy. However, I think that it still has the potential to be a really good deck. I mean, red and yellow, it's a solid combo. Having access to the aggression and the removal of red and the life gain of yellow, and being able to not only buff your leader, but buff your characters as well definitely helps. the life gain here isn't as strong as with Luffy, but I think it makes in a way it makes up for the aggression. So I think I'm gonna throw this guy, and again, this is just a prediction because the deck's only been out for a couple of days, so we don't really know a whole lot, and we're still kind of, for the most part, we know how these decks are gonna work, but we could be wrong. So I think I'm gonna throw this in the B tier. I think it has the potential to be really strong. And again, not as strong as Luffy, but having that extra aggression could probably help. Now let's talk about Ace. So Ace, in my opinion, is probably the weakest of the three. And again, if I'm wrong, feel free to, or why you disagree, feel free to say it in the comments. I am opening to listening. I am not going to get offended. I'm not going to argue with you and tell you you're wrong. I want to hear why, but I just think that the fact that at the end of your turn, or sorry, you trash all your face up life cards. So I think that kind of holds it back. And I think just yellow and blue is kind of an awkward combination. Not necessarily bad, just doesn't synergize as well as compared with yellow black or red yellow. So I think just the synergy there just isn't as strong. I have seen it being played a lot more recently, and I've played it quite a bit on the sim and just have talked with people at locals. So I'm gonna throw it. My prediction is for now it's just gonna be a local strictly deck. I don't think that it's gonna be quite as strong as the other two, but I could be wrong, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking. And Hody Jones or Goaty Jones, as people were saying. Yeah, I mean, there's not really much you can say. I'm sure I'm gonna get just roast in the comments, but yeah, it's pretty meh. It's a pretty boring effect. It's just mono green, so there's nothing really that stands out about it besides the memes. If you've been on and read it all, it's a meme deck for sure. But I mean, hey, if you win with it, you go for it. But I don't really have a lot to say about it, just other than it's just not that good, if we're being honest. So it's enough said about that. Let's talk about Purple Luffy. So Purple Luffy, excuse me. Um, this was the deck that I ran in OP05 because I was super excited about it. And I'll be honest, it kind of let me down. Like Purple Luffy honestly did kind of let me down. I mean, the matchup into Sakazuki is pretty rough, and it's just not super consistent. So now I have won with it, but not consistently enough to win an event or even win at my locals. So I don't know. It's just it's very high risk, high reward, which is super fun to play, but I think overall it's a locals deck. It really is. If you want to have fun, you play Purple Luffy. If you enjoy that play style, go for it. But if you're wanting to take something like to a tournament, or if you want to like, get a winner card, I'd probably recommend playing something else. But um and who knows, maybe I was just bad with the deck, but from what I've seen and just the matchups and everything, I just don't think it's as strong as people were making it out to be, which is a little sad because it let me down a little bit in OPO5. But I just think it's a locals deck. I think that's just where it stands. I guess the last deck I'll talk about, which again I don't really have a whole lot to say, is Sabo. The last deck I'm probably going to talk about is just red black Sabo from OPO5, which, yeah, honestly, its ability can be really good, but, and I mean, with some of the new support it's gotten, I think it's gotten better, but overall, it's just, there's just a lot of better options out there, and I just think that there's a lot of ways to work around it. You can save things on board, but I mean, just with the removal and life gain, and just a lot of the matchups really, I think just really just kind of hurt this deck. So I have seen it at locals. I have played against it a couple of times, and there have been times where the games have been really grindy, but I don't know if they were necessarily close. So I don't think that it necessarily it's meh. I think it's just kind of locals. I'm gonna probably put it at the very end. Like it's not quite as bad, like that bad to just put it at the bottom, but it's not really too far from being at the bottom. So I don't know. But anyway, guys, this is my take on the meta right now. this is kind of where I stand. You know, again, I think these three decks are super strong, easily the top three. I think these decks may end up being up here at some point, but right now I think this is where they're going to stay for the current meta for OP06. And then these decks are competitive. They may top a couple events. And then these decks right here are just decks that you're just going to see at locals. Like you're not going to really see them anywhere else, or at least not very often. And then we just got my boy down here just chilling because, yeah, that's just where you belong. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Again, if you're new, please like and subscribe. Let me know if you agree or disagree on my list. Like I said, I'm happy to hear it, but I will see y'all next time.